Hello, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to attend our May session of the 2017 Firestorm Crisis Coach webinars. So welcome. We're talking about natural disasters and your organization and planning for preparedness. Please do connect with us socially. We are at Firestorm Soul on Twitter. We'd like you to be our friend at Firestorm Solutions on Facebook. You can find us on LinkedIn. And the hashtag for this and all Crisis Coach sessions is Crisis Coach. If you tweet or Facebook message with Crisis Coach hashtag, I will see it and be able to respond. Speaking of that, if you have a question during the session, we may not be able to get to it, but we will follow up with an email after the session, and you can ask questions or comments via the GoToWebinar dashboard on the right-hand side. I think it's on the right-hand side of your screen. There's a little chat area. Please feel free to use that. We do pay attention, and Bill Baker is our moderator in the background, and he will let us know. Also, you can always email us any questions you have at webinars@firestorm.com. As you know, Firestorm transforms crisis into value, and we appreciate your welcoming us into your organization. This session is being recorded and will be available on your YouTube channel at Firestorm at youtube.com Continuity Experts. Firestorm's expertise is in crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. We are the nation's crisis coach. Now, this presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussion, and any work product provided by Firestorm should be read in conjunction with guidance given by national, regional, and other local authorities, as well as your company's personal counsel, because the information given and the comments made in this session should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. We are very happy to present today for the Georgia Independent School Association. Dr. Jeff Jackson is unable to be with us today, but we do appreciate all of the support that we have received over the past 4 years from your organization, from the Georgia Independent Schools, and the great work that you do. If you would like more information, of course, visit gisaschools.org. Find them on Facebook, Twitter, email. If you're joining as a guest today, please do check out the wonderful services from the Georgia Independent School Association. I'm very happy today to welcome my boss and the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Firestorm, Jim Satterfield. Jim is an expert in everything that has to do with crisis, and that covers a really big bucket, but it's true. I've had a couple of crises in my own life that Jim has been instrumental in helping me through, because he is clear, he's focused, and he truly understands what critical decision support is when someone is in a crisis. I have seen him work with CEOs of Fortune 50 companies, and I have seen him work with managing directors of small consulting practices, and his advice is always sound. So we're very fortunate to have Jim with us today, and I'm going to have Jim just sort of open up the session for us when we talk about what we covered last month, which was what keeps you up at night. Jim, you want to talk a little bit about these specific areas of what keeps our folks up on the independent school front up at night, and what we found when we surveyed?
Well, as you look at these impacts that are coming up on the screen and think about it, we all have, as we think about our schools, the care and safety, custody and control of the children that are in our charge. And the most difficult thing that you would ever have to do is pick up the phone and call a family and say your child won't be coming home from school today. And when you think about that, we start to put that, and violence certainly plays a role, and we see that repeated over with 2 million episodes of workplace violence in our schools, our workplaces, and as they come into place. So we focus heavily on that. Many times we kind of gloss over natural disasters and what can occur and how that's going to relate to us in the organization. This is a survey of just under 1,000 organizations we did about focusing on what their number one concern is. And I think the takeaway here is to look at 1 in 4 identified natural disasters. And here in the state of Georgia, we could certainly are familiar with tornadoes, and the northern portion of the state, we can talk about winter storms and events, and along the coast, hurricanes. We certainly had Hurricane Matthew last year and coming together. Flooding in other areas or droughts, the fire that's going on right now in the Okefenokee, and I think it's 150,000 acres that have been decimated, but we've seen it close expressways. And even in Atlanta, we tried to burn our expressway down, which is a whole other story for another time. But that 24% area, and you look immediately to the right, you see loss of life. Many times in these natural disasters, there is a direct impact onto our school and our students. And then to the left, how you respond could have an impact upon your brand and reputation. So if you had the 15 and the 6 and the 24, half of what we're concerned about is covered as a background for the field that we're talking about today. The worst disaster, the worst crisis that you're ever going to experience is the one that happens to you, your organization, your school, your employees, your families. Those are going to be the ones that come together. Right now, if we were to say United Airlines, you would immediately see the picture of the doctor being drugged down the aisle of that plane. It's going to have a significant impact. And as you've set up with the next slide, Karen, it looks like there's an important question. What's that question? And there you have it.
I was on mute. If something happens in your organization, can you handle it? I think when I was first talking to Jim, when I first joined Firestorm, I asked him, who is our number one competitor? And Jim's answer to me was denial. He said, many organizations will say, it's not going to happen here. And we just simply never know, especially when it comes to Mother Nature. We can't fool with Mother Nature. So let's talk about that just a little bit when natural disaster strikes. This is an image from Joplin, and we are very fortunate during this terrible tragedy in Joplin. We were doing some work with a couple of women who actually started a Joplin relief organization the moment it was happening with 2 cell phones and a Facebook account, and that was it. And they're still rebuilding. They're doing a tremendous job, but we know the town was destroyed. And all of these different organizations had to come together and understand how to work together with their plans. So the number one thing is a well-designed and well-executed plan that can help your school or your organization outperform. One of the things, if I'm taking my children to an organization and I'm going to entrust you with them, I want to know that you have good plans set up in case some sort of a disaster should occur, a flooding event, or whatever is prone to occur within your local area. Often plans also aren't updated to reflect changes within the organization itself or other things that may be happening environmentally. I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and we have had over a very short period of time in a certain area very close to our local high school, the addition of 8,000 roofs. And I don't know what they did with the engineering plans, building on top of a landfill, but because of the building that has been going on, a neighboring, much older neighborhood now floods almost 6 feet during significant rain events. And that didn't happen in the past. So plans have to be, which also floods the school. So plans have to be created and flexible given the changing circumstances and environment. And Jim, you recommend those plans be reviewed at least once a year, and then every 3 years a significant review. Is that true?
Yeah, standards and best practices are that you're going to be updating your vulnerability and threat analysis, your your emergency plans, your crisis management, your business continuity. At least with changes in personnel, there's a maintenance schedule, just like you would change the oil in your car. But once every 3 years, the standards are to let's go back and look at this in new eyes. Think about the changes that happen in your school over time and what that's going to mean. Firestorm follows a predict, plan, perform methodology. Now, in a crisis, most everybody wants to jump immediately into perform. Let's start to do something. Let's say something. And in many cases, those instincts are misplaced or will be compromised. So we start back in the predict. What are the vulnerabilities and hazards that we need to address? And we'll have a slide in a few minutes to kind of outline an approach there. But what are their impacts? What are we going to monitor? What are the triggers that would activate our plans? In your school, you've got a security plan. You've got an emergency plan. You've got a crisis management plan. You've got a plan around how we're going to continue to operate. And we can think about plans around communicable illness and those types of cyber, because you have a great deal of personally identifiable information or financial information in the case of payment of tuition, and then finally personal health information or HIPAA related around dealing with individual students. So what are the plans in each of those areas? And then finally the perform or the training and the testing of those plans. You don't want the first time you try to test your plan is in the middle of a disaster or a crisis. So looking at those over time will make a significant difference. The picture you see now, imagine if that was your school, if this was your campus. That tornado destroyed that building. When the parents got to this building, and remember the roads are disrupted, everything is chaos, they're not going to be comforted until they see their child. But if your child was on the second floor of that building and hadn't been moved, if they were near that window that's just been blown out, those are the exposures and the direction. And there really was nowhere to go. And here in this particular situation, if I told you that some of the students who died drowned, you say, wait a minute, Jim, it's a tornado, it's not a flood. But they were down in a boiler room, the piping busted, and the room filled with water, and the children drowned. So looking at the statistics and looking at the information makes a difference as we come together. So as we carry through this, it's how are we going to make this happen? The third bullet down, promoting this culture of preparedness, is really what we're thinking about in the school. You've got the emergency response, and we follow the standard protocol in schools. Shelter in place, of lockout, lockdown, evacuate. Shelter in place is generally what we think of when there is an event where it's safer inside the school than outside. The severe weather scenario that we've been discussing up to this point. Lockout is when there's a physical violence threat and it's outside of the school. Lockdown is when the threat is inside. And then finally, evacuate is if it's better to get away from the school and into another area to go out. So the emergency response plan, and every plan is written for a different audience. Is this the one written for the students? And then is there one for the teachers? And then who manages this? How do we manage this incident? And then how do we make decisions with the crisis management plan? And then finally, how do we get back to whatever the new norm is? So plans cover a wide range. And we mentioned a few minutes ago this concept of doing a threat analysis. And the term of art here is called an all hazards approach. And you create a matrix and you list the natural disasters, the man-made, what's the onset speed, what's the duration, what's the intensity, what would this do to our facility from an impact, what would this do to our people from an impact, what would do this to our financial aspects, what would happen to our brand and reputation. As you indicate and prioritize those, now then we're going to come back and talk about what are the triggers? What could we monitor that was about to occur? We recommend, and the best practices are, that this should be reviewed annually and a significant update once every 3 years in order to stay in line with standards and best practices. Karen?
Thank you so much, Jim. That was great. That was great. Now, one of the things when we do all of these plans is to involve everyone, right? I've gone to organizations before, and you know, when we talk about other aspects of an organization, I've asked what your mission statement is, and I've asked, you know, 5 different employees and gotten 5 completely different pieces of information. So even though you think you've involved everyone in what the plan is, you may not have either communicated in a consistent way or made information available in a consistent way, not through any fault. But failure to train is one of Firestorm's identified 5 common failures, right?
Right, and when we talk about those 5 failures, and then I want to talk about this slide, and if this doesn't scare everyone on the call, then you don't understand what you're looking at, and I'll explain it in just a second. The 5 failures are supply chain failure. That's the largest single failure in a disaster and crisis. Second is failure to train your employees for working at home. 70% don't know what they're supposed to do at school and at work, and then 95% don't have a disaster plan at home. The third is failure to identify and monitor. This monitor failure is the key failure associated with that. The fourth is failure to update and test your plans. And then lastly, it's the ability to have a crisis communications plan. The blue line across this map is where the tornado went in Joplin. Imagine if you had the Plaza Towers Elementary School, or even look at the Briarwood Elementary School and the impacts that would be associated with it, because it was a normal school day and then it wasn't. Behind where it says failure to train is one of Firestorm's identified 5 common failures, you'll see the words Moore Medical Center located just below that. So in this event, you took the hospital out, which is where you would take everyone if you had to give treatment. You took out 2 elementary schools, and can you imagine the confusion that was going on? Confusion in first responders, confusion of parents, and everyone is converging on a scene when you can't drive your car and the chaos that's occurring. We tell, and as Karen shared earlier, that our largest competitor is disaster denial. It's just not going to happen to us. It's not going to be so bad, and we're smarter than everyone else. If you look at this picture, it says it could happen, and it could happen to us. We work with many associations and groups, both in the educational field as well as in the normal business. And we were speaking at a building conference, and there was a roofing company there that manufactured the asphalt roof tiles that go on houses. And they were located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and their plant was destroyed in the tornadoes. So they did some research, and they decided to rebuild the plant. So they built it in Joplin, Missouri. And yes, it was destroyed there. I did ask the owner of the company, could you tell us where you're going next? Because we don't want to be wherever you are associated with it. It can happen, and it can happen to you. And in this situation, and we'll reinforce this a couple of times today, the decisions you make, the actions you take, and the words you say are going to determine how the outcome is in this particular event. So what's everybody's roles and responsibilities? There's going to be an adaptation of what happens depending upon the event. Is the building intact? Is the building not intact? Do we have injuries? Do we have death? What are we going to deal with? And the only way we're going to get through all of this together is by having that plan, having everyone trained, and then we test it. And we're going to give you some other insights around some other individuals that you want to involve as you design those tests. So, Karen, I think your points on the screen are certainly on target. And if everyone just will look in that second bullet and see the word culture, this is a part of who your school is and what you must do here. Karen, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. And on the area of communications, we really must think through our communications, how we're going to do it in a major disaster, and then test that. If we're without power, if you have alternate means of communicating, but you don't have access to those alternate means. So let's say well, that's okay, we've got a Twitter account or we've got a Facebook account, but you don't know how to get into those accounts because the person who manages those accounts is been affected by the natural disaster and can't get to the location, can't get to school, can't use their phone, has no power, and the batteries are dead. Someone has to back up your primary, and then you have to have someone backing up your secondary. As Jim says, you have to be 3 deep, because we never know what might happen through communications in a crisis. A couple of weeks ago in Dallas, a hacker turned on all 156 emergency sirens across Dallas. And my first thought when I saw this was, if you can turn those on and hack in, then you can hack in and turn them off. One of the fortunate things when it comes to weather and disasters is, of all of the things that we monitor, and we monitor for behavioral risks, we monitor for environmental risks of all types through a variety of tools and approaches. Unfortunately, we have our meteorology has come such an incredibly long way. We generally do know far in advance that there is a significant major weather event that's going to occur. But it's this communication that helps us understand what we need to do and when we need to do it, and we need to train people to pay attention to the communication and believe and take cover. I lived a short period of my life in Kansas, and I can tell you I value a tornado shelter. Well, during this period of time, there was a significant vulnerability identified, and for 2.5 hours, these sirens went off. So you must test your communications. Jim, you have some of the best points to consider, I think, in this area. You want to walk us through coordination, crisis, and compliance?
Everybody says we need to communicate in a crisis. You're going to feel the pressure, and you've heard us in other conversations talk about the why communicate and making sure that you understand the purpose behind it. But in a crisis, there's 3 types of communications. Number 1 is coordination. Number 2 is the crisis itself, the brand and reputation. And number 3 is the compliance factor. The first communications around coordination are, what do you want people to do? Now, in a school environment, we know 4 things. We can shelter in place, we can lock out, lock down, or we can evacuate. That's clear, it's specific, and it's understood. The shelter in place is it's safer in the school than it is out. A lockout is there's a physical violence threat outside the school. We want to keep it away. A lockdown means the threat is inside the building. And evacuate is if the building itself becomes unstable or unsafe, or we can get away, we want to get away from that. So those are always our first communications, and they will be done quickly, and planning them out in advance and not using code words. I was in a school and their symbol was the Colts, and so they said for evacuate, Colt stampede. Well, that could confuse people of what it is you want them to do. I was walking through a school and there was an announcement this was a code orange, and I turned to the person who was giving me the tour and I said, what is that? And they said, I don't know. So using code words don't work. You want to give specific, clear directions and coordination of the actions that you expect to have taken. The crisis, the brand and reputation, that will come generally the second day. The first day is around the event and the coordination efforts, and then as you think about the brand and reputation, what is it that we're going to say? And I'll give you 3 tips here in just a moment. And then finally, compliance. If we have cyber breach, we're going to have to notify the people that their information has been taken out and potentially lost. If you become aware that a child is at risk, then you're a mandated reporter. You're going to have to call Child and Family Services to get that message out and have it communicated. So as you look at it, you see some explanations here. We did the crisis management, as I think most of you remember from our other conversations, at Virginia Tech. That was 10 years ago. And our 3 key communications there, and this thinking about brand and reputation, were that they wouldn't be defined by the event, that they would invent the future, and that they would embrace the families. That whatever bad things happen, that's not what your school is about. Inventing the future is, what are you going to do to make sure this event won't occur again? And then finally, keeping the focus on those directly impacted. So there's a lot to consider when you get into this communication cycle. Karen? Oh, okay. So now we've got your slide up. You just continued it on, so I'll do a general comment and then throw it back to you. If you don't have these written out in advance, you're going to have a problem. It's easier to edit than it is to create. The concept here is message maps, having those clearly established and understanding who's going to speak. In general, we do not want the head of school as the spokesperson initially within the crisis. Most everything you learn initially is wrong. You're going to be making decisions based upon wrong and incomplete information. So that's why it becomes so very critical that you address those needs on it and have the ability to get alternate channels that are going out. I heard Karen mention Facebook and Twitter. You're not going to suddenly say, oh, I think we'll create a Facebook page in the middle of a disaster. You want to have that up alternatively, ready to go, and train your parents and your students and your staff that that's where they can go to see information. The big advantage of taking that approach is that's hosted elsewhere. All you have to do is to get to it, to get your message out. Now, Karen, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. People will think we've practiced this if we're not careful. I want to say next that I think I opened with saying that, you know, I would like no other crisis support than Jim during a significantly challenging time. And I'm your neighbor in South Carolina, and we had a 1,000-year flood event as a result of Hurricane Matthew. And Jim is also on the coast. Jim quite often spends time on St. Simon, and we both wondered what was happening. He was in Atlanta at the time, I recall, Jim, and you weren't sure what had happened to your own property, and you had some real challenges getting in to the island. The island was closed so that you couldn't survey the property. So that's just his own property. So what happens if no one can get anywhere? This is an image from that period of time. I have some others that I'll share with you. And the roads washed out completely. So if you can't get students to your facility, if your teachers can't teach, if your building has experienced structural damage as a result, how long do you have to analyze that? Can people who need to help you determine whether there is damage to your facility, your campus, or your grounds, can they get to you to do that? How long? Do you have power? Do you have clean water? How are you going to continue operations from this point forward? And we may think of it at a high level. Oh, it's okay, you know, we have school on demand or whatever you may have as an alternate. But what if there's no power? What if there's no water? You're not going to have students at their homes if there's no water or power. They may be at a facility. They may have evacuated to your facility. You may be an evacuation point. So, Jim, you want to comment a little bit on how we communicate and plan for this type of an impact?
Well, first of all, since we're talking with the Georgia Independent School Association, you all know that in Atlanta we decided to burn the freeway down a few weeks ago, and 250,000 cars go across that point. Subsequently, the damage with the gas pipe bursting and closing out I-20. Now you've got a significant issue that you're not going to have all the people, not all the students, not all the faculty, not all the teachers associated with that. So in looking at it, what would you do on day one? What's the minimum number that you need to have in place to be able to continue to teach? And then by day 3, by day 4 or 5, starting to ramp and doing it, what supplies do you need? We were working with a large private school, and they're in an area where they're subjected to a variety of exposures, tsunamis, volcano, hurricanes. It's certainly a lovely area, but certainly one that is loaded with natural disasters in those exposures. And the head of school said, well, we don't need desks. We don't need anything else. If we have the students and we can put them in, we'll sit on the floor and we'll we're going to talk and we'll have school. So what is it that you absolutely have to have in a disaster environment? Because you're not going to have internet access. You're not going to have a lot of the other things that you look for. But to be able to say how we're going to deal with this will make a significant difference. Disruption is going to occur. As we look through those, planning that out in advance, having that conversation, looking at those resources, and then saying, this, we combine these two classes, we would change this one over to here. Those are the elements that we'd have to look. So Karen, back again to you.
Thank you, Jim. And I think this is an image that I hope creates an impact. This is one of my neighbors in my neighborhood after Matthew. Matthew wasn't even that big of a hurricane, and I don't mean to say that in a way that makes light of the situation. And I know I sat and I recorded some of the wind events that came through. There's a tree I was particularly concerned about. But the important thing about this particular image is Jim's point to me when he first saw it, and he said, that employee's not going to work. So if we have students in that house, if we have teachers or other employees or staff in our schools, that person's not coming to work. As a matter of fact, people who wanted to help that person get to work couldn't get to that person's home to help them because we had trees down all throughout the neighborhood and on our major road. We really only have one major road in this area, and it's a historic road, and so the historic oak trees are not allowed to be trimmed or cut down without a great deal of conversation. So we get some significant blockage when this occurs. And then during this period of time, not only did we have trees down, we were without power for an extended period of time. Jim, what's the longest you've ever been without power?
A week, and it was a winter storm, an ice storm in Atlanta. And as that storm came through, we were caring for my mom and my stepdad. We were dealing with Alzheimer's and other issues around it. And when the only heat that you have is a fireplace, imagine the amount of wood that you would burn, trying to cook in the fireplace, trying to keep a semblance of normalcy there. If we take away electricity, you move back in time 150 years. That's the world that we're in. And I know we've all had a power outage and walked into a room and flipped the light switch even though we knew the power was off, because we are ingrained that that's going to happen. Your cell phone battery is going to run out. That's your lifeline. Do you have a hand crank system that you can keep it charged? Those are the elements that we need to think about, because this is the point where you'll have a significant failure within any plan, either a personal plan or a plan at your school. How are you going to deal with the loss of power? Karen?
Yeah, I have been without power in snowstorms before. So I think the longest we'd ever gone was at maybe 48 hours. We were 1 week without power in this specific event. And there were a few things. The first thing was that Jim taught me to fill up Ziploc bags of water and put them in the freezer so they stacked nice and neatly. And we had a ton of water should we need it. And we were very concerned about that because along with the wind event that we had a 1,000-year flood event. And North Carolina was very, they were devastated by the flooding as well and are still cleaning up. And the challenge that occurred, we also live on a river. We've got rivers on both sides that then go into the ocean. So we had a king tide and a huge tide surge in our downtown area, and the rain sat on us for quite some time, and we had quite a lot of rain prior to the actual wind event. There was flooding because of that, but then as the flooding continued on up north and then receded, as it started to recede, the waters receded back to the ocean, the rivers overflowed, and they overflowed their banks and compromised bridges and roads all throughout the state, and roads simply washed away. So there was no way that the electric utilities folks could get to where they needed to get to help people restore power. There was no clearing of trees. We were our own first responders. And we have discussed this as a neighborhood because we seem to have a lot of first responders in our own neighborhood. We have 3 police officers and a variety of medical personnel because we're very close to a large hospital. So it was great because we really had prepared folks. We know not nearly as fortunate as we were. So I can tell you that our planning has changed. We're more comprehensive in our planning now after experiencing this event. And I will tell you, there is no more attractive thing I have ever seen in my husband than the day he walked in with that Champion 4000 generator. I love that, and it's an important thing to have in your home. But these are simple tools. These are simple things that we can do to help ourselves. What do we do on a larger scale? So we have a book called Disaster Ready People for a Disaster Ready America. You can download for free on our website, or email us at webinars@firestorm.com, and we'll give you the link and more information on that. You can also customize it for your schools if you'd like to. And the brief that will be available in about 48 hours on our website at firestorm.com includes all of this content plus Jim's points. And so I'm not going to read through all of this, but on a very high level, this is really more for a rain or a hurricane or tornado event, not an earthquake. But we know we want to walk through planning on all events. For this just gives you a good checklist to walk through that. This image that you're looking at now is also from that event. And this was when we started to clean up afterwards. So the crews finally could get through, and they started chopping up trees and that were blocking roads and putting them off to the side. And that's when everybody started talking about, okay, what does insurance cover? How is our school going to be able to open its doors? We've suffered damage. We can't use this part of the building. Are we allowed to use that part? Who's going to assess it? And I know no person better than to help answer those questions about insurance than Jim Satterfield.
Well, when we think about it, and most of the time as we do design exercises and plans, we don't stop to say, how would our insurance have reacted in this particular situation? The time to figure that out is not when there's an immediate problem associated with it. It's to think about it in advance to be able to deal with those particular exposures. So understanding the risk and how the policies interplay. So if you've designed a test, give that to your insurance broker and say, how would our insurance interface directly with that particular exposure, and what would be the recovery? Take your hazard impact matrix, the risk and threats that you've identified for your school, give that to the insurance broker and say, which policy responds to each of these threats? We took an organization and did a cyber breach. Now, this was a very sophisticated, large financial services firm, and there were 8 things that would happen to them in a cyber breach affecting their organization. We gave it to the insurance broker, and they came back and said 6 of those are not, in fact, covered. So to identify that now, to make a plan, to understand it, and how they're going to respond and when they're going to respond to the claims you have, is a critical portion of the planning that you need to do for your school. If you don't do that now, then you're going to find out that you've got a gap, and that gap could be extremely damaging to the school. So insurance is one of the biggest missed areas in about everything that we've been talking about today, from planning and responding to a crisis. Karen?
So when you assess threats and you are working with a school organization, is one of the first things you look at as a potential threat what that coverage is?
Absolutely. And then planning that back and integrating it together into, as you see on the screen now, what's our crisis management structure? How do we make decisions? Because remember, in a crisis, almost everything you learn initially is going to be wrong or incomplete. Then you've got to have an alternative source of information. And we talk about open source intelligence. Listening to what's being said on social media, you'll find out the bridge is out or the road is damaged. Or we think about also open source intelligence relating back to violence and behaviors of concern. But all of those elements must come in. So we have to document what we're going to do and then test it to make sure that we have the appropriate responses. A little while ago, we talked about making decisions in this environment. And so the decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the words that you say will determine, is this going to stabilize or is it going to escalate out of control? So those are the things we want you to think about at each one of these areas, developing those areas, because it's easier to edit than it is to create. Have the messages designed in advance, have it established how that's going to communicate. Up on your screen now, you're seeing the Firestorm Crisis Management Performance Maturity Model. And this gives us the ability to evaluate how does someone do in a crisis. We look at the decision process, the roles and responsibilities, the information clarity, the speed of decision making, and the communications effectiveness. That's how you're going to be measured, how well we did. Are you at a stage 1 level within your organization and your school so that everything comes as a surprise and you just kind of make it up as you go? Are you a little bit better or down more of a stage 2 basic environment where you've got some things identified and here's how we're going to react? But notice the difference when we go to a stage 3. It's supportive. There's pre-action. There's things in place so that you're already identified. But ultimately, it must become a part of our culture. It must be who we are. And every time you move between those stages, that's a breakthrough. It's a breakthrough from every single aspect. And the last one becomes a value proposition. I tell people many times, the last time a surprise was good, I was 5 and it was my birthday. If you find a crisis that's going on, it's going to be extremely significant for the life of the school and what happens to who you are. If I ask you today to tell me the state flower of Colorado, we could maybe figure the state flower of Georgia, but Colorado, most of you wouldn't know who that is, what that is. But if I said the name Columbine, you wouldn't be thinking about the state flower of Colorado. You'd be thinking about the shooting at the school. So that's going to determine who you are and what happens, and how you respond in these natural disasters will be the defining moment for your school. Karen?
Thank you so much, Jim. I want you all, some of you are joining us you may be in a conference room having your coffee before you head off to other activities. And some of you may be watching this in a recorded replay because you're in class with students or other school activities. I really want you to ask yourself and your teams the question, though, where is your organization today and where will you be next year? Will you have grown? This performance maturity rating to me is one of the most important visual representations of how we want to see your organization grow. We want you to have a clear playbook for major crisis types with clear and known decision rights, clearly defined and established roles and responsibilities that are predefined by event type. And you've got to train on these things so you know, do you have the right people in the right place? What are the strengths and weaknesses of what you have today? Make the adjustment now before the actual crisis or event occurs. Make sure that you know how information is going to flow through the organization because it will speed your decision making if accurate, clean, clear, and articulate information is coming in and out. Make sure that during that decision-making process that only resources that are needed are being consumed, and that will happen in a mature organization because everything is created on a more efficient basis. You'll have a proven message process with predefined messages, and you will be able to communicate out in a way that keeps people safe. and every crisis is a human crisis, and that is our ultimate goal. I want to thank you for attending our session today. I know it's a time out of your schedule that we very much appreciate, and I hope you value what we've delivered. If you would like to download a copy of our brief, it can be found at firestorm.com/brief, and it will be available in about 48 hours. We like to transcribe each session individually so that we can include Jim Satterfield's comments into the basis of the slides themselves. Once again, I would like to thank and we appreciate the Georgia Independent School Association for being so supportive and allowing us to share this information with you. If you have any questions, please comment at webinars@firestorm.com. And with that said, I'll give you back your day. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim Satterfield. Thanks, Bill Baker, for moderating our session. And thanks to the Georgia Independent Schools Association. This will end our session for today. Goodbye.